you know, pulled everything together. But by and large, though, I'm a big fan.
Okay, we've finally got the technology arrayed. There's the link has the notes, which I'm about to share, and we're in James chapter 3. This is a wonderful section of James for a lot of reasons. It's not a particularly hard section. I mean, like there's not verses I think of about this chapter 3 that like, oh, that's so hard to interpret. We've dealt with a lot of the more challenging and debated passages, chapter 2. Chapter 3 is hard because nobody wants to do what it says. And a lot of us would look at it and find part of it, challenging if not impossible, at least by the record of human history. But I do want to remind you, and I said this way back in chapter 1, that verse 19 and 20 really set out the outline for most of the epistle. And we've been focused on the quick to listen part. Everybody should be quick to listen. That's half of chapter 1 and all of chapter 2. And then the next part is be slow to speak. Now, quick to listen, of course, is quick to listen to God's word. And we spend a lot of time talking about humbly embracing God's word. Slow to speak is exactly what it sounds like. It has to do with our words that come out of our mouths, because if you can control your speech, you can control your whole body, James will tell us, and it becomes a hallmark of maturity. Our words matter, and I think we know this, but James provides a great reminder of how much they matter. Now, other books of the New Testament and or other passages in the New Testament, Old Testament speak to words, and I won't get to point to all of them, but I will point to some of the Proverbs and some things from Jesus says in Matthew's Gospel, because we should take a bit wider look at this matter of our language. James 3 is a key part of understanding it, but it's addressed in so many places in the Bible, often directly through instruction about speech, and often just by examples. We think of the very wise way in which Nathan confronted David about his sin with Bathsheba. You may recall him telling an allegory there about a rich man and a poor man, but it worked, and so we have all kinds of examples of speech, all kinds of examples of bad speech. We can think in the book of Daniel of Nebuchadnezzar waxing on about how great he is and how he built his empire, and then God making him somewhat like an animal as he ate grass for 7 years. So we get all these examples in addition just to the straight up instruction. But words, so words clearly matter. The Bible says a lot about it. We're the master of our words until we utter them. And we need to remember that, because James is going to make the point that the words have great power both to destroy or to give life in that sense. But once they're out of our mouth, you really can't take them back. They take on a life of their own sometimes, and they can't really be stopped. You can try to, ask forgiveness sometimes, but even so, the consequences of the words tend to continue. So we can be people that encourage, praise, and empower others with our words, and often that's not that hard to do. But too often we forego that, but in the right circumstances, we do the stuff James is focused on. Accusations, even false ones, can destroy a person's livelihood. We've seen that kind of thing play out in the media from time to time. When years down the road, it's found out the allegations were false. But this happens all the time, even outside of the stuff that makes news, and it can destroy a person's livelihood, their reputation. It can even end their life sometimes. So the Bible says a lot about how we ought to use speech, and that we should never use things like gossip and slander. We'll kind of come back to that in a bit, this matter of gossip and slander, because I think Christians do it all the time, and if they don't do it, they're willing to listen to it, and that's often just as bad. You kind of become an enabler instead of telling the other person, look, you know, you're gossiping. I don't want to have any part of it. it's easy to speak hate and death instead of life and peace. It's the exact opposite of what, and it's the sin nature coming out. It's us as believers still, putting the sin nature back in the driver's seat. And then this all becomes very, very easy. And social media for obviously it's not all bad, but it has made this matter of wicked speech a lot easier. And it amplifies people that in the past would not have had a podium to speak from. And that's another thing about social media where we have to be very careful. We're going to give stand before Jesus and give an account. He said that in Matthew's gospel. Every idle word's going to be judged. And that for us, we think of the Bema. But James was quite explicit in chapter 2. He said to speak and to act is those who will be judged by the law of liberty. And that speech would include what you type out on social media, of course. So some proverbs, and then we'll get to what James says. But I just wanted to and this is just scratching the surface of the book of Proverbs, but they really say a lot about speech. And Proverbs 10:18 through 21, the one who conceals hatred has lying lips. And whoever spreads slander is a fool. Now just think about that. Whoever spreads slander is a fool. The book of Proverbs talks about different kinds of people, and you can collect the verses and categorize them by some of the people it describes. A wise person who has knowledge and understanding, a fool, a naive person, a mocker or a scoffer, the immoral woman who's out there to seduce people. I mean, you have these people, as Christians, we don't want to be a fool, but those who spread slander, they are fools. Now, in under the law of the land in our country, slander is false information about somebody or something, particularly about a person or a company. I think in the Bible, slander doesn't have to necessarily be false. That is, you could know something about somebody that's true, but to make it public would be damaging to that person, to their reputation, and doesn't serve anybody that you're talking to any purpose. So we need to have a little broader understanding of slander. Okay. You find out about something in somebody's past that no one else knows, or you think they don't. Whether it's true is beside the point. And this is quite a statement. Those who spread slander, they're a fool. Well, if you're a fool, you're certainly not a mature believer. When there are many words, sin is unavoidable, but the one who controls his lips is prudent. Now think about that. That's really what James is saying. He's building on, James is building on things he heard Jesus say and building on things that, his Jewish readers could recognize from the Old Testament and from the Proverbs is prudent. Prudent's an interesting word. We don't see it in English a lot unless we're in a legal context usually. I rarely hear this word, but in the law, prudent is everywhere because it's your general duty of care when you're out there in the world. You need to drive your automobile as a prudent person. Okay. James says you need to control your mouth in that way. The tongue of a righteous person is pure silver. Now, I like this because we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the negative side of speech, the bad things speech can do. But the correct speech, and this is key for us as Christians, we need to take hold of this because there's a lot of focus in James 3 on the negative side, but the tongue of the righteous is pure silver. Like it also has great power to do good. And we want to take that to heart and think about that because a lot of times it isn't even all that hard, but we do have to be proactive about it. Look for opportunities to say some words of encouragement to those around us. The heart of the wicked is of little value. So great value in the tongue of a righteous person who's by implication speaking righteously. The lips of the righteous feed many. What a way to say it. Jesus talked about the word of God as such that you live by every word. when in contrasting it with food, right? Not by man doesn't live by bread alone, but on every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Well, the mouth of God's people can also, in that way, feed because we can speak words that edify, instruct, counsel in a wise way, that sort of thing. Fools die for a lack of sense. Proverbs 11:13, a gossip goes around revealing a secret. Now, I love how the King James says a talebearer. It uses that archaic word we don't use anymore, but it's great. A talebearer. They go around revealing a secret. Why do they do that? Have you thought about that? Like, what really motivates people to gossip? Try to back that up. Like, what's the root problem?
It's pride or wanting attention, wanting glory for yourself.
Yeah. You know, you can take a person that for whatever reason they are or they perceive themselves as having very little consequence in some way, but now they've got a little nugget that no one else knows, and for a brief moment in time, everybody will stand at attention and listen and hang on every word. Gossip for the right person is they get something out of it. It's not just trying to get somebody back, although it could be. It's often that fleeting moment when everybody will listen to them and stuff. It's in this is why it's connected with being foolish. A trustworthy person keeps a confidence, and I will say, if you minister to people, I don't mean in a vocational sense, although it comes along with that. But if you make yourself somebody who, ministers to people and they realize that you're ministering as a Christian, you're using God's word. It doesn't have to be teaching, it's just one-on-one conversations and stuff. If people believe they can trust you, they will share some confidences. A lot of people will. It is so critical that we learn how to keep those confidences, that we can do that, and that some other people know we could. Cheryl?
Um, One of the things I wanted to say is that the other motivation is there are some people who just want to hurt and
Hmm.
to damage others. And I see a lot of that on social media. They feel powerless or whatever, but there's a real desire to hurt people.
Hmm.
And that's probably, I think, the most damaging because I don't believe that people who really want to grow up, I don't believe they stay the same. I believe they change and they grow. And if you have someone who's constantly trying to bring them back or tear them down to something in the past, I think that's the height of evil because we all want to be better than we were yesterday or feel, I don't know, feel better about ourselves than maybe we did yesterday or earlier. And there is so much really hideous, ugly power in people who just want to hurt you.
Yeah. And what you're getting at is our words can be weaponized. They can be an assault weapon, and I think they are the assault weapon of choice for a lot of people, especially a lot of Christians. And it's scary. I should have said, about gossip. What is gossip anyway? Because it can be true. If the gossip is false, which it often is, and often the person telling it doesn't even know because of the telephone game, it gets changed. But what really is gossip? Cheryl? Oh, you're on mute.
Gospel is saying something about someone else that might or might not be true, but that person is not there. So you're telling this to other people, and it's most likely without the permission of that person that you're
Hmm.
talking about. But it's
Hmm.
pretty much talking about someone who's not there.
Yeah, yeah. And I would say generally to someone who doesn't have a need to know, right? So I will give a true and just a very simple example. Someone had put my name as a job reference years and years ago who had been like a secretary, and And so the people that interviewed her called me and they asked very specific questions about the quality of her work and stuff. Well, they've got a right to know. Or I could have chose to not give the reference, but I mean, they have kind of a right to know that that's not gossip. This person has given permission, like you said, that, person's not there, that they've given permission now, put me down as a reference, and the people asking have a right to know. A buddy of mine several years ago applied to move into to become a naval intelligence officer. He was already in the Navy, and guess what? Somebody knocked on my door at my house to ask to interview me about him. And they were pretty specific questions, right? But you understand they have a right to know. So we don't think of those things as gossip. But when we're talking to people that don't really have a right to know or a need to know, you got to ask them, why am I telling this person this, right? That's the kind of thing. And when we're on the listening end, why do I need to hear this? If you want to really stir the pot, just ask the person fixing to tell you the gossip, how's this going to edify so and so? That is the standard in Ephesians, right? The book of Ephesians, I won't have this verse up, but it basically says, I'm going to paraphrase, but and it uses the word edify. If it's not going to edify them, don't say it, right?
What's interesting is both of these words begin with GOS, gospel and gossip.
Hmm.
And I wonder if there's some common root back there in Old English, like maybe this is a bad gospel or something like this.
Yeah, who knows? Well, the one who has knowledge restrains his words, right? Now, the has knowledge is in the Proverbs kind of speaks of a wise person. They restrain their words. What's James tell us to do? Be slow to speak. See how he's getting at wisdom, and we won't get to it today, but probably next week. James is going to talk about wisdom in chapter 3. He's connecting speech and wisdom, and he's going to do that. But the one who, I like this, of course, a modern translation. The one who keeps a cool head is a person of understanding. Even a fool is considered wise when he keeps silent. You've all heard that saying to better to keep your mouth shut and be thought wise, or be keep your mouth shut and be thought a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. It's from this proverb. The fool can be thought wise if he keeps silent, discerning when he seals his lips. And the last one, I've always loved this one because I always say you can speak life or death. And that's what it says here. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit. You'll bear the consequences of what the words that are spoken. So with that, let's jump into James. He gives some positive illustrations of how speech works, and then in a moment he's going to give negative illustrations. We all stumble in many ways. That word stumble can be translated trip or get tripped up. We do. But he wants to move on a specific way we stumble, and that of course is in our choice of words. If anyone does not stumble in what he says, he's mature. And I'd read this one before. He indicated this in the first chapter as well. It's a hallmark of maturity because what he's viewing maturity as, of course, is not that it's just about how you behave, but your maturity, I think it's something of the heart, but it's going to come out in how you behave. And when I say behave, right, being righteous, walking in a righteous way. And if you can tame the tongue, he's going to use that expression here in a bit. You can tame the rest of you, basically. And he's not dealing here with how exactly we do that and all that. He's just kind of making that point because I think it's easy to self-deceive to be self-deceived and think that we've reached some level of maturity when the mouth has not caught up with where we think we are, and it betrays our lack of maturity. So he talks about the two positive illustrations, the bit in the horse's mouth that I think I mentioned last week. That controls the whole animal. The rider pulls one way or the other or pulls back, and the animal is moving around. And then ships, of course, even in the ancient world, they go through fierce winds, but they're guided by this very small rudder that's out of proportion. A large rudder is not required to pilot that ship. And in the same way, it's our tongue that's pulling us left and right, like the horse or like the ship. And that's just the idea. That tongue can easily be the indicator of the control of the whole thing. This was just a photo, and you can see the fairly large, kind of cherry picker type device here to get up there and work on that prop. And yeah, that rudder looks big, but relative to the size of the ship, it's nothing. And that's the illustration for the ancient world as well. And we should take it to heart because the tongue can do such destruction. So he gives negative illustrations. The tongue is a small part of the body, but it boasts great things. It has the ability to do quite a bit of boasting or bragging. And I want you to think about that, and then we'll talk about starting forest fires here in a second. But the Bible often associates boastful speech, let's say in the bullet, with evil people, in particular the Antichrist. When you see the Antichrist referenced in Daniel, in Revelation, you see it connecting to boasting great things, to speaking arrogantly. Isn't that interesting? What do you see the Bible say about Jesus's speech? There's a big contrast here. And the Antichrist, and it says it more or less the same words three times in Daniel 7, that he had a mouth that was speaking arrogantly. I mean, that's the kind of people we try to find and elect, for crying out loud. But the Antichrist, you can see why he would, I mean, our culture would love him, and it will love him. In Revelation 13:5-6, the beast was given a mouth to utter boast and blasphemies. It was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. It began to speak blasphemies against God. See how the focus is on the speech, but don't miss that part about boasting, utter boasting and blasphemies. It's just to say, this matter of the tongue, this of course affects everybody, and the most wicked people we could think of are, we tend to talk of it in terms of their speech because that's what comes out. Wicked people say wicked things. Now they can hide it sometimes because they can realize that saying the wrong thing may be something they have to go and publicly apologize for the next day. But under the right circumstances, they'll say these things, and of course the Antichrist will. So this tongue it's really it's like a loaded weapon that's just dangerous, right? And he says, consider how a small fire sets ablaze a large forest. All kinds of things can cause a forest fire. Often they're accidental. This is out of date now, but it's been a few years back. But some family was, people do these gender reveal parties, and you can do pretty simple ones, but sometimes they want really extravagant stuff. Their gender reveal party started a forest fire that burned down a whole bunch of stuff. That certainly wasn't intended. I mean, they were acting foolish, but it wasn't intended. And that's the thing with our speech. Even if we don't intend to set the forest ablaze, right? We didn't, it, you don't think about this as much anymore, but what, certainly y'all can remember, and I remember when I was growing up, well, I mean, most people I knew smoked. Most people in my family smoked. And so when you're driving down the road with these people, they flick their cigarette butts out the window of the car. And that on a number of occasions, that kind of thing has started a fire. Even if not a forest fire, some little grass fire, there was no intent to do it. That's how carelessly we can throw out some words and then go into defense mode when we see the fire start to light up. Well, I didn't intend it that way, or you're being thin-skinned, or whatever. But the destruction's the same. And he says this powerful word, this phrase in verse 6, the tongue's of fire. It's ready for destruction. He calls the tongue a world of unrighteousness placed among our members. I mean, this is just the language is it almost feels over the top, except that when you look at what's happened in history, you can see that this is true. It does happen. And so the destruction happens whether we intend it or not. That's loaded with irreversible damage that can come from our tongue. It can carry out the sin that lurks in our heart. That's the world of unrighteousness. He's talking to believers. We as believers have within us still the old flesh, the old nature, and that is a world of unrighteousness. We have the ability to walk in the Spirit, not let that flesh be in the driver's seat, but we can do the opposite as well. And when we do, there's a high likelihood that can come out in not only our thoughts, but also our speech. And so the tongue can just draw on that world of unrighteousness for additional ammunition, as it were, to then go on the rampage. And so I've said words are the Christian's assault weapon of choice a lot of times when they, of course, shouldn't be. Thoughts or comments so far? I don't think these are hard verses, but it's just letting it soak in that I need to personally take this to heart and think about my words, preferably before they're out of my mouth. As they say, you can't unring the bell. But thoughts or
Yeah, it's
comments?
yeah, it's interesting how other sins like anger, sexual sins, like all they always also engage the mouth. I don't know if
Yeah.
you've ever understood that, but the mouth is working when those other ones are working.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. And we'll see some passages, some things Jesus said in a moment that kind of get to what you're saying. Yeah. Cheryl?
Well, it talks about, and it actually goes to the heart of the matter, which is our heart. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why Paul said that our hearts are evil. And,
Mm-hmm.
my thing is that, okay, so I've got my mouth clamped shut. But the problem it didn't start with my mouth, it starts with my heart. So the heart is what needs to be changed.
Mm-hmm.
Once the heart's changed, the lips change. So that's just my comment. And as you were talking, this saying kept coming to my mind, loose lips sink ships.
Yeah. Well, but of course that's a great saying, and it's obviously from a different time in our history that a lot of especially our younger people have no idea what we're alluding to about that. But but it remains true in a different sense now that loose lips do sink ships. And you're right, we have to have a heart change. This isn't about masking the heart, but it's having an awareness that if we can't control our mouth, that we do have a heart problem, not a mouth problem. And and that's what this is about. Um, and so we need to think differently, right? That's when we talk about changing the heart, we're talking about thinking differently. We're sort of, and I'm not a computer person, but my mentor always used this example back in a time when everybody knew what DOS was, but it's like we're on a different operating system when we're not Christians and we're sort of operating on old DOS or whatever, and then a new operating system's been uploaded, right? And that's kind of what's happening. We need a new operating system for that ultimately comes out of our actions, our thoughts, and our words. And when we go back on the old system, we're gonna say stupid things. But I will say practical thinking, at least it's worked for me most of the time. And I'm not saying I always get it right, but I made a deliberate, um, kind of decision a long time ago that I've continued to do. I really do ask myself the question repeatedly as I'm engaging in conversations where I can see a heightened risk of saying something I would wish I could take back. I ask myself, are these words of grace? Am I saying them to edify that person? If I'm saying them to win an argument or make that person who, by all accounts, may deserve it, feel bad about themselves, then I'm not saying it to edify, and they're not words of grace. And I really do. I let that go through my head, and I've had a number of instances that while someone's yelling at me, and I think for the wrong reason, or they're angry, I'm telling myself, whatever you say next better be designed to edify. Paul talked about putting essentially that you could respond to a person in a way that's counter to how they've responded, and it sort of puts lumps of coals on their head in an indirect way that because you're responding in not the way they expected, and anyway, we have to think that way and not go to sort of our first knee-jerk reaction, give them as good as they've given us, you know. Uh, so this tongue. Add a little more. Jesus said a lot about it, and I just wanted to throw this in because, we saw this in Proverbs. James is talking about it. Jesus calls some people brood of vipers. Now, to say that we need to have control of our tongue doesn't mean that we'll never say negative things. It doesn't even mean that we would never raise our voice and a lot of things but these things. Um, we have to be careful with them. And Jesus is talking to these people with criticism of their conduct. How can you speak good things when you're evil? For the mouth speaks from the overflow of the heart. And I think that's what Cheryl was pointing out earlier, that's what's there. It's a heart issue. A good person produces good things from his storeroom of good. Those good things are words. And an evil person produces evil things from his storeroom of evil. And remember what James said? Your tongue is like a world of iniquity, a world of unrighteousness. It's all in there. And we have both storerooms because we still have the old flesh and we've got that new nature, that's that seed of God that John talks about in 1 John 3. We've got both. What are you going to draw from? I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will have to account for every careless word, or the King James, every idle word they speak. I take that seriously. And that's true of Christians. Again, James said it. That was he said in James 2. Speak and act as those who will be judged by the perfect law of liberty. By the way, this passage makes clear what some people miss in Matthew 7 when he talks about the tree bearing good fruit. The fruit in Matthew 7 and the fruit here is words. Fruit doesn't have to be something other than words. Fruit's a metaphor that could be a whole lot of things, or once in a while, the fruit's just a fruit, right? But here, the fruit is words. For by your words you'll be acquitted, and by your words you'll be condemned. If your words reveal your heart, you can see why your words would condemn you. Because they're condemning what's in there. They're condemning the storeroom you're pulling it from. They're condemning your heart. And it's having said that, think about book of Romans. Paul spends 8 chapters of deep theology about all aspects of salvation and sanctification, deals with Israel in chapters 9 through 11, and then gets to the application in Romans 12 and kind of starts off out of the gate saying, you need to renew your mind. That renewed mind, and that's kind of it's a similar, it's not identical to the heart, but it's getting it's sort of that idea. The inward person needs to be renewed. This all connects up, and our words then, if we renew our minds, the way we think, and mind has the idea of not just thinking, but the focus of our inner person. We renew that, it's going to come out in these words, according to what Jesus has said. Matthew 15, don't you realize that whatever goes into the mouth passes into the stomach and is eliminated? People get all caught up on, the food or whether the cup is clean before you drink on it. He's like, that's going in. You better worry about what's coming back out. What comes out of the mouth comes from the heart. And that defiles a person. It reveals what's there. From the heart comes evil thoughts, murders, and this, is kind of the comment that Dan made earlier. This is all coming out of the mouth, but its source is in the inner person, in the heart. That's why, you can think about the Sermon on the Mount when Jesus is saying, you've heard it said of old, but I say, and he talks about adultery and murder and things, and he takes them beyond just the physical act to the thought in the heart, the predicate thought in the heart that gives rise to that conduct. And so he says things like, you're angry at somebody, you've committed murder. You're like, what? You've lusted at somebody in your heart. You've committed adultery. What are you talking about? Well, now we're all guilty. That's why he wasn't, you can imagine how they were responding, but this is, you see it here. From the heart comes the evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, all those things he was talking about in the Sermon on the Mount. Notice slander, false testimonies. These are the things that defile a person, but eating with unwashed hands does not defile a person. Yeah, it's a powerful, powerful statement. Eating with unwashed hands, that's what legalists worry about. A wicked heart is what Christians should be thinking about because we're called to be sanctified. We're called to be transformed by the renewing of our minds so that our heart won't be wicked, that we won't put the flesh in the driver's seat. We'll let this new nature control, and we're going to change how we think to do that. Well, so some negative illustrations then from James. He says basically humanity's figured out how to tame all kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, fish, dogs, cats, whatever you own. We figured out how to tame them or to domesticate them. So he's kind of thinking of that idea. But we just can't seem to tame our own tongue. We can feel pretty good about ourselves because of human ingenuity and accomplishments. And we've created this great technology. We've made planes, ships, automobiles. We sent the Artemis rocket to orbit the moon recently, but we just can't seem to control our mouth. And all you have to do is look at who today is going to uh, go on social media or in the national news and make fun of Charlie Kirk's widow because of his death. Like people are doing that. It's a thing. And that's just an easy example. It proves that we can't tame the tongue. It really does. And it's a restless evil, full of deadly poison. It just won't stop. It's restless and full of deadly poison. It's a snake. It's there waiting to bite somebody. It's kind of how, put the fangs in. This is not this may be why James 3 doesn't get preached a lot. It's not hard. It's just everybody's going to leave feeling like their toes got stepped on. But we need to take it to heart. Of course, deadly poison means that the tongue kills. And of course that's primarily in a figurative way of all the destruction it could cause. So, what are the deadly types of speech? Gossip, slander, malice, or some of them. Um, Gossip, I suggested earlier, could be true or not true, but it's typically information about somebody else who, in all circumstance, all likelihood, isn't present when it's said. Being spoken to someone who has neither the need, well, they just don't have the need to know or the right to know. Slander, in modern terms, is false. I think in the Bible it doesn't have to be. It could just be. I suspect it. I feel like from some of the passages it could be true but negative information. But either way, you're transferring that information to other people, and it's generally done for the purpose of causing harm. And that's why people libel or slander. In our country, of course, there's laws against libel and slander, civil laws, and you can be sued for it and that kind of thing. But like it's just a thing. It happens all the time. Companies will slander another company because they're competitors. People slander and say false things on social media. If you read a social media post that talks bad about somebody you don't like, and so you share it, but the social media post suppose two hypotheticals. One is the post is actually true, this negative thing, you know, that you're reposting. Second hypothetical is it's not true. It's one of the, majority of social media posts that's just false, right? You don't investigate it, and why should you? You don't like this person anyway. It's bound to be true, so just share it. Is this a problem with God? Does he care about our social media post? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a big problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but I didn't vote for that guy. I don't like him. He's a bad guy. Why can't I
Oh,
post that you
oh,
just
well, in
make it
that
up?
case, well, in that case, it's okay.
Okay. Now I feel better. Um, as a Christian, and this will, of course, we might just find ourselves more benefited from trying to stay off social media. But if you want to stir a fire, and I've done it a number of times, all you've got to do is ask them for the evidence for what they said. And I remember somebody that got really angry at me for that. And what stuck in my mind though is this person's holding themselves out as a Christian, and I'm not saying they're not. I'm saying that you when you hold yourself out publicly and make sure everybody knows you're a Christian, you really need to think about them seeing conduct in you that's not a reproach. But this person got really upset when I asked for evidence. This was at a time when it was negative comments about. I'm trying to remember his first name. His last name was McCain. You know, he ran for president once, and he's
John.
deceased. John McCain. So they didn't like John McCain, so they posted something highly negative of him because I think at the time Donald Trump was saying negative things about him. And all I asked was, well, what's the evidence for what you're saying? And got all mad. And, I mean, just like all I've asked for is the evidence. But there seems to be this idea that they could post totally made up things about him because that's not who they're going to vote for. They don't like him. That's not a good way of thinking about these things. And I don't know how you could read through James 3 and be okay with it. Someone else had posted that stuck out in my mind, and it kind of resonated with me because I knew how to just research it real quick. And it was something, trying to say something bad about the Michelle Obama when at the time she was first lady about her law license. And so I just went on, every state has a website for essentially the state bar if you're an attorney licensed in that state, and you can go and look up a lawyer and see if their license is in good standing. It'll usually show if there's been discipline, like if someone's been disbarred, it will usually say it. Anyway, whatever they said, all you had to do was go on the state website. You could quickly figure out if it was true or not. And of course it wasn't. And I didn't vote for her husband, but it would be completely ungodly. It would sin to publish something either that you know is untrue about her or that you didn't even take the time to look it up before you said it, because that's just not an excuse. And this was, of course, Christians saying it. So just trying to it come up. We set the bar low if we think the person we're talking about deserves it. We need to be careful. Carol, I see you have a hand raised.
Yes, the evidence is not something that you read or something that you heard, or just because everyone's saying it, that's
Mhm.
not the evidence. The evidence is what you personally have experienced.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And we should, you know, we have to be first asking ourselves, should we even be saying this, even if it's true? As I said earlier, I think if it doesn't fit within slander, it's within malice. It could be something true about somebody, but I don't need to say it if my purpose is to harm them or harm their reputation. But if I'm going to say something, I should have my facts right. I mean, that's just a general thing about all of life. I should try to have my facts right, but especially if I was going to say something negative about somebody, and I'm just when it's somebody that we already, for whatever reason, we don't like this person, it's easier to say. And I even see this among Christians debating theology. There'll be a theologian they don't agree with, they don't like them, and so they'll publish something about them that's very negative. They did this or did that, or he had a DUI or whatever. And like, have you looked that up, Dart?
I think as Christians, it is critical for us in everything that we think and say and write and do to honor God.
Yes.
So I've tried recently to be aware of everything that's happening. Now, sometimes I'm on the road and some idiot passes me on the right or something, and yeah, my thoughts don't honor God,
Right.
but I'm aware of that.
Mhm.
But everything we say and write should always honor God. And that has helped me to be a little bit less of an idiot these days.
Yeah. Well, that's a great comment because that's kind of what I was sharing earlier with my own experience was kind of the same. Once I got focused on it and started making myself ask those questions, like you're asking yourself, well, before you say it or write it, will this honor God? That will cure most of our problems with speech. But it's a uniquely Christian way of thinking. Will my words honor God? Dan?
Yeah, two things. One, with what Dart said a second ago, I honestly think most people who drive don't understand you're not supposed to pass from the right. I think they're just ignorant. Like I don't know how they're learning to drive, but anyway, the I was thinking about this James 3 and it's interesting the Lord when he was being uh at that kangaroo court, he didn't say anything. And this is the one who could speak them out of existence, and he said nothing.
Mm,
And then later on, when he comes back again, he's going to open his mouth and kill them. So, as a measure of maturity, I mean, there's a pretty good example of it.
yes. And he could have said a lot of things. Um, it's a curious thing. Jesus essentially took the fifth, right? And you know his response in all circumstances gives us such a good lesson. There are times when Jesus used harsher words, and that has to go into our mix. When is it appropriate to use harsher words? This isn't like that we're always using pleasant words, but I think those times we have to think them through pretty carefully. One that comes to mind to me is when somebody is a matter of, is publicly lying about God's word. If I said that, what you're saying is completely untrue. If I said that, or even made it more negative, it may or may not, it kind of depends, but there's a time that we have to be negative. Judd?
It's me. Yeah, this class has helped me a lot with the social media stuff. You had a suggestion to ask a question rather than, I think that that is a fantastic piece of advice. But I'm really going to have to pray about all this because I also feel that in the medical right now, and having worked through most of COVID, I'm resharing a lot of what I believe the good doctors that lost a lot of their certifications, license practices, the government went after them, and I totally believe that they were lied about. And I don't, listening to this class, we have a whole group, about 35 people, that are mostly health professionals, and that's all that goes on in the group is really crucifying the people that, like I feel that verse Ezekiel, and you will know that I am the Lord when I lay my vengeance on you. I don't know. I feel like I'm really going to have to pray about it because I also feel like not saying something is real cowardice,
Mhm.
real cowardice when you
Mhm.
feel like you have evidence of very wrongdoing. I don't know.
Yeah. Well,
This
and
class is stirring
yeah.
me up.
Well, you're making well, you should pray on these things because we have these statements in James. We haven't canvassed the whole of the Bible on this, and that's why I was mentioning a moment ago. There are times when we say something that's negative and it's appropriate to do it. And there is a difference. And again, context matters in which this happens. There is can I say something negative about political policy that I don't agree with? Well, of course. But one, my words should be true. I shouldn't be making stuff up because a lot of people, there's a lot of stuff out there and then it gets reposted that's just not true. But like, are we simply revealing truth where it's in a context where there is a public need to know, for example? Or am I sharing something that's true where there's not a public need to know, which is what makes it gossip, right?
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
feel
like the public needs to know that Dr. Fauci and others funded the Wuhan Institute through large grants. I mean that's just now it's almost beyond question for those who look for it. That those are just they're just factual information of which there is a public interest. Does the public need to know that so and so, had an affair in their marriage? No. Even if that's true, they may choose to share that with other people, and that's their option. But you have that little tidbit, I'm just using that as an example. It's the kind of thing that gets out and it can embarrass people, even if it's true, and you don't have a right to share it. So it's not always easy, I think. But we do have to we have to navigate that. Let's is there still a hand up? Okay. Let me end with this closing questions. I skipped a couple slides we'll hit next time. But anybody know who Edward Everett was and what famous speech he made? Nobody?
No,
Yeah, we call it the Gettysburg Address, right? Except he was the keynote speaker and he talked for 2 glorious hours. And then he was followed by the president who talked for a few minutes on a speech he wrote out in a few minutes. Which one do we remember? The keynote address? I mean, this guy was a well-known figure in his day. That's why they gave him 2 hours of time. We remember what Lincoln said, right? Right, four score and right, and and I just wanted to remind you that words for different reasons can be long remembered or sometimes not, but your words can be empowering too. We don't want to just we worry about starting forest fires, but they can be empowering and make a difference. And even in Christians probably should spend more time thinking about rhetoric and clarity of communication. And it's where, you know, there can be sermons that are maybe designed for performance, and that's not quite right. But there can also be speech that's is done in a way that sticks with people and it is beneficial, and they'll remember it. There's just great power in developing this speech. We can speak life or death. If we could harness this idea of speaking life to people, of being a source of encouragement and empowerment, that will help us make a big difference. I've shared the example before of my wife always tells her little first graders that they're smart and that they're geniuses. Um, you can do that with people. You can do it with adults. You can find something to be encouraging about. And there's a whole lot to this speaking life, but we really need to look for those opportunities as Christians. We claim to have a message of life, and of course, it's the gospel. But we can speak life in a broad sense if we choose to. And remember, you don't get to say mean, hateful things and say, well, it's just I'm speaking the truth in love. Your words matter, the words you choose. Your tone matters, and clarity often matters because we don't want to be misunderstood. Cheryl?
One of the things that we haven't talked about specifically, and this is, I think, a really rough one. When we speak words on social media or we just speak words out because we are angry.
Mhm.
And I think that's a really hard one because are we speaking because we're just really ticked off, or are we speaking out because we really feel that people need to know this particular fact? And I think that is very, very difficult to ascertain the truth of that because I think a lot of times when we do speak out, we're really speaking out because we're angry, more
Hmm.
so than someone really needs to know this. Or we might justify it by saying, well, they really need to know this.
Yeah.
So can we all kind of talk about this? I personally have a problem with that because I know that a lot of times when I do speak out and it might be not appropriate, it's because I am angry and not because that person really needs to hear what I have to say.
Yeah. Well, I would say something about anger. Paul picks up anger in Ephesians, and he has this kind of cryptic statement that a lot of people have misunderstood. He says, "Be angry and sin not." You you can. I mean, here's just try to boil it down. We have to. Anger is a natural thing. Some would say no. If you get angry, it's always sin. It's what you do with the anger. Often it's a very quick response. It wells up in our heart quickly, whatever, the injustice we think has happened or whatever, and it wells up. The question is what you do with the next step. It's how you channel that. And I think that's where having a transformed mind, a renewed mind, really comes into play because anger is something that's not going to go away, nor is it necessarily always bad. Under the right circumstances, anger is very natural, but it still has to be channeled in a way. If the way, I've known folks that this is their way of channeling anger is continuing to yell, scream, and even get physically aggressive. And that's not channeling it in the right way. Even if there's a true injustice that sort of justifies that quick welling up of anger. So when Paul says, be angry but sin not, I think he's having to do with how we channel and deal with the anger when it happens, not with beating up ourselves because we got angry in the first instance. And so that's I think a big part of it. I don't know if that's helpful as at least a starting place in how we think about anger and what we do with it. Um, we have to create new patterns if our old ones are bad ones. And a lot of times we grow up with dealing with anger the way it was dealt with by our parents and our family, siblings and stuff in the household when we were young. And if the way to deal with anger is to throw things, people become adults who throw things. And that's where Christians really have to take to heart, am I just following the old pattern, or can I create a new routine or pattern for how I deal with anger? So any thoughts about that, or is it complete gibberish?
That makes sense. And I'm also reminded that anger really isn't a tool for God in most cases. I mean,
Yeah.
yes, there are sometimes you can react to a grave injustice, but when I'm angry, it usually means I'm going to say something stupid. And I usually wind up deleting it in about an hour if
Yep.
it's on
Yep.
social media.
Yep. I had a professor who probably in his 60s, and when he was a young person, child, the father ran out on the family. And he kind of stuck in his mind that like his dad was never at the ball games and the activities he did. He just didn't see him. And he shared that, as an adult, and he shared this publicly, by the way. I mean, he shared as an adult that if he were at a ball game, for whatever reason, it would often set off that old anger again from the father that abandoned the family, decades earlier. But he's the one that was telling me about, training his own, training himself. How do I channel that? And when we think about forgiving people, that's one of the areas where little things can remind us of the wrong they've done. And it's the reason I've said before, forgiveness isn't really a one-time thing. It's kind of a daily commitment in a way. But something can happen that just brings it's almost like a fresh feeling again of exactly what you felt when the original wrong had happened. We're angry for that moment. What will I do next? Susan?
Yeah, I think that um oh, hold on a second. I, what I get angry about these days is not just anger, there's fear-based anger. The fear-based anger is based on what I see occurring in Western civilization at this time
Mm,
and what the ramifications of that mean. And then I see what young people think and say at this point in history. And I just become so, I mean, how do we talk to these people who believe 100% that Marxism and socialism will work, that that you can do anything you want and there are no repercussions, that yes, there are times when it's right to kill somebody, that being homosexual is just completely normal and an alternative lifestyle. I mean, where would I even begin in not being angry, but to try to respond and to turn this around?
mm.
And a lot of times, the only thing I can think of is to ask questions and make them answer the question. And sometimes I'm so I guess not despondent. I'm just so messed up about what's happening that I can't even think of a good question to ask that would turn their thinking in a different direction.
You feel
And
overwhelmed.
you
Yeah.
bet, you
Yeah.
bet.
Well, I do have a couple of suggestions to think, and I'm glad you raised this. This is kind of gets to something we might could explore and maybe have a whole lesson on what you just said, because in a broad stroke, what people currently believe in Western culture, there's all kinds of different versions, all kinds of different isms. They all suffer from the same thing. They are a worldview that is reductionistic. It is, and they can't live it out.
And it's
Um,
bad information.
it is bad information, but it's smaller than the world. It all is really Romans 1 playing its way out. How we deal with
Yeah.
it, first of all, as Christians, we've got to, and you're thinking along the right lines about like talking, engaging people and talking, which is, what got gets people assassinated sometimes, obviously. But understand
Yeah.
this, that a lot of Christians don't have enough of an understanding of Scripture to have the conversation, unfortunately. They've thought of Christianity as nothing beyond maybe the gospel and sort of keeping your nose clean, as they used to say, and that kind of thing, having some rules. And they haven't seen Christianity as a full-orbed worldview, as an explainer of all reality around us. Not that it contains everything that's
Exactly.
true, as I always say, it doesn't have calculus, much to my chagrin, but it is an explainer of worldview, of God's worldview. And from that, we can build an approach to trying to effectively communicate what is missing from modern, what I would call secularism, if we want to just broadly get all the isms under it. What's missing? Why does it fail? Why can't it actually be lived out in order to help you see sort of the error?
Yeah,
Those,
I've been reading books that were written in the late 1800s and from a Christian point of view, fiction.
Hmm.
And um, the person who is trying to witness to people in these books is in a Judeo-Christian uh, civilization, so
Right.
that it's naturally assumed that when they witness to people about Jesus Christ, they're going to know
That's right.
something about him from just general knowledge of
Yeah.
Christianity. And that doesn't work anymore.
You're exactly right. You're saying what I've been trying to tell people for a long time that think, you'll just knock on a door and ask people, well, where would you be if you died today? And when you talk about being saved, they don't know what we're not even speaking English to them.
Language.
It has no meaning because they don't know what they're to be saved from. So I
Well, yeah,
was
they don't believe that things are sins.
Well, that's right. And so where it leads to, it's just not shouldn't be any kind of revelation to anybody, but think of it as pre-evangelism. Like we need to help people see the need for the God of the Bible before we get to the actual gospel message, because otherwise we really it just using the words we read in the scripture that maybe in the 1800s more people
They
would have had
weren't.
some knowledge of, they don't get it.
Yeah, they have no frame of reference
Right.
whatever to
And that's not
Christianity.
a criticism, it's just recognizing the culture we're in. The Apostle Paul is
Yes.
debating the smartest people of his age in Acts 17, and he comes in and he knows the culture, and he doesn't start with the strict, kind of narrow gospel message. Jesus did the same thing. He told this rich young, guy that, said, I've done it all. And Jesus says, well, go give away all your stuff, then you can follow me. And he walks away upset. And people say, see, you're saved by works. It's pre-evangelism. Jesus is showing him he can't be saved by his works.
Yeah.
So that we need to engage in pre-evangelism. And in our culture, we're going to have to get our hands around better how the younger generation is thinking, and sort of then know. And by the way, this wouldn't be the same in every culture, but I'm thinking of here in Western culture. In order
Yes.
to approach this in that way, Greg Kuchel's book is great about asking questions, but you've got to have some of the answers yourself too when you ask the questions.
Oh,
The other
yeah.
one, Nancy Pearcey's book, Finding Truth, is an outstanding book
Okay.
for broadly assessing and finding the weaknesses in every flavor of ism that is secularism. Okay?
Yeah,
Romanticism, realism, materialism,
because
I
I
don't
get
care which
overwhelmed.
ones, they all have the same core faults. And anything she wrote's great, but her book, Finding Truth, will give a kind of a guide to
Thank you.
that. Cheryl?
Um, just to add on to what Susan said, because she's like right on the nickel. But I think the issue today is where people start from is there's no God. They're
Yep,
godless.
that's
And I
right.
think many churches today are not Bible based.
That's
They're
right
feel
too.
good. But the bottom line is, it's something that I have thought for quite a while, for a long, long time, in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s. Um, People just kind of went along and took for granted that the laws were good and they were right and people would make the right decisions. But whether people were actually Christian, I don't know that they were. And I think the great falling away that you hear about, that's coming, is the realization that the culture has so basically gone downhill that you can't be a nominal Christian anymore. You can't say you're a Christian but not be really a Christian. And the whole idea is people will come to realize that, okay, I'm not Christian, and the great falling away will be people who are unable to make a stand because they have nothing to stand on.
Yeah. What I think we should do, and if not, maybe next week or the week after, we because we're out of time today, and this conversation deserves a lot more attention. It is something I've thought a great deal about. I don't claim to have all the answers. I think I've figured out a few of them. I think we should set aside some time and think about broadly worldviews, which gets to how we talk to people in a culture that typically your evangelical churches are several decades behind. A lot of the apologetics that they're talking about is speaking to something that worked in the 1980s. It is moving fast, and there could be some value, I think, in thinking through this, and hopefully, so you'll know that we don't want to lose heart, but how we approach people and try to share truth with them is going to be different than it was for Paul in Acts 17 and different than it was for the evangelist in the 1800s. It just is. That is, I'm not saying it's bad or worse or more difficult or whatever. It is different. Just as if I went to a different culture, like when I had an exchange student from China where communism had sort of, made atheism everywhere, and she'd never heard anything about God. The approach is different, the conversation's different, but I think that's what would make some sense. I'm going to stop the recording here. I'm happy to stick around a few more minutes. I just know some people may need to jump, but we'll take that conversation up. It's chasing a rabbit out of James, perhaps, but it is a critical thing to think through.